The clink of champagne flutes at New York's most exclusive restaurant, the Gilded Cage, was the soundtrack to a lie. At the center of it all sat Ethan Blackstone, a man with a $10 billion fortune and a heart encased in ice. He was celebrating his engagement to a woman he didn't love, sealing a deal that would merge two corporate empires. But then, a waitress, a woman he'd never seen before, with tired eyes that saw too much, did something impossibly brave. She handed him the bill, and tucked inside was a small folded note. It contained just 12 words. And that night, those 12 words would detonate his perfectly constructed life, forcing him to cancel a wedding that was set to be the event of the century. This is the story of how a whispered truth on a scrap of paper became louder than a billion-dollar promise. The light inside the gilded cage was the color of old money, a warm, honeyed glow that dripped from crystal chandeliers and pooled on tables, draped in immaculate white linen. It was a light designed to flatter, to smooth over imperfections, and to make the impossibly expensive food look like art. For Ethan Blackstone, it felt less like a flattering glow and more like the sterile, unforgiving light of an operating theater where his own life was being dissected. He sat opposite Victoria Davenport, the woman who would, in 7 days, become his wife. To the rest of the world, she was perfect. Her hair was a cascade of blonde spun by the city's most sought-after stylists. Her dress a sliver of crimson silk that cost more than the annual salary of the man pouring their champagne. And her smile was a brilliant, practiced thing. She was the daughter of Richard Davenport, CEO of Davenport Industries, a rival titan in the world of global logistics. Their marriage wasn't a union, it was an acquisition, a merger of bloodlines and stock portfolios discussed in boardrooms long before it was ever whispered over candlelit dinners. "Isn't it divine, darling?" Victoria said, her voice a smooth, cultured purr. She held up her flute of crystal, the bubbles catching the light. "To us, to the future." Ethan raised his glass, the crystal cool against his skin. "To the future," he echoed, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He looked into her eyes, a stunning shade of sapphire blue, and found nothing there for him. He saw ambition, a reflection of his own, and the cool, appraising glance of a business partner. There was no warmth, no shared history that wasn't calculated, no secret language known only to them. They were two perfectly crafted statues placed together in a museum exhibit titled Power. The restaurant buzzed around them, a low hum of discreet conversation in the clatter of silver on porcelain. They were a spectacle, the city's ultimate power couple. Photographers had mobbed their car on the way in. Tomorrow their picture would be splashed across society pages with fawning captions about love and legacy. Ethan felt a suffocating pressure in his chest. The weight of a life chosen for him, a path paved in gold, but leading nowhere he wanted to go. He was 34 years old, the inheritor of Blackstone Corp., a global empire built by his formidable and ruthless father, William Blackstone. Since he was a boy, his life had been a series of strategic moves. The right schools, the right internships, the right friends, and now the right wife. He had played the game so well that he had forgotten he was even playing. That's when he saw her. She moved between the tables with a quiet grace that was entirely out of place in the room's ostentatious display of wealth. Her uniform, a simple black dress with a crisp white apron, was unremarkable, yet she wore it with a kind of weary dignity. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her face, pale under the restaurant's golden light, was devoid of makeup. She wasn't conventionally beautiful in the way Victoria was, but her eyes, they were deep and intelligent, and for a fleeting moment, as she placed a bread basket on a nearby table, they flicked towards his. In that brief glance, he felt an unnerving sense of being truly seen, not as Ethan Blackstone, the billionaire, but as a man trapped in a gilded cage. Their designated waiter, a stiff man named Jean-Pierre, was suddenly called away by the maître d'. A moment later, the quiet waitress approached their table to take over. "Good evening," she said, her voice soft but clear, holding a notepad. "My name is Chloe. May I take your order, or would you like another moment?" "We're ready," Victoria announced, not bothering to look up from the menu. She listed her choices: the lobster bisque, the seared scallops, the truffle risotto, with an air of bored entitlement. Chloe wrote it down, her expression neutral. Then she turned to Ethan. "And for you, sir?" He hadn't even looked at the menu. His mind was a million miles away, lost in a fog of regret and obligation. "I'll have the same as she's having," he managed to say, finally meeting her gaze again. Her eyes held his for a second longer than necessary. There was no flirtation, no fawning recognition. It was something else, something akin to empathy. It was unsettling. It was human. Throughout the meal, Chloe was the model of efficiency. She refilled their water glasses, cleared their plates, and moved with a silent economy of motion. She was invisible, as she was trained to be. Yet Ethan found his eyes drifting towards her again and again. He watched her interact with other tables, a brief, genuine smile for an elderly couple celebrating their anniversary, a patient explanation of a dish to a confused tourist. He saw the faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the subtle tension in her shoulders. She was working hard, not for glory or recognition, but simply to get through the night. The dinner conversation was a sterile affair. Victoria spoke of floral arrangements and seating charts, of which photographers to hire and which political figures to invite. It was the logistics of a state dinner, not the joyful planning of a wedding. "The Davenports will be at table 1, of course," Victoria said, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on the tablecloth. "And your father will be there. We must make sure Senator Thompson is seated with him. They have business to discuss." "Of course," Ethan said, his voice flat. Business. It was always business. As the dessert plates were cleared, Chloe returned to the table. "Will there be anything else for you this evening?" "Just the check," Victoria said, already pulling out her phone to scroll through her social media feed, a small, triumphant smile on her face as she looked at photos of their engagement party. Chloe nodded and retreated. Ethan watched her go, a strange impulse rising within him. This was his life, sealed and delivered. A loveless marriage, a future of board meetings and society galas, a slow, suffocating death of the spirit. He was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to take a final, irreversible step. When Chloe returned, she placed the black leather bill folder discreetly on the table next to him. As she did, her fingers brushed his for a barest fraction of a second. A jolt, like static electricity, passed between them. Her eyes met his one last time. It was a look of profound, unspoken understanding. Then she turned and walked away. Ethan opened the folder. His black credit card was already inside, ready to be handed over. But underneath the exorbitant bill, there was something else. A small, square piece of paper, torn from her notepad, folded neatly in half. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was a breach of every rule, a gamble that could cost her dearly. His first instinct was one of annoyance. His second was a surge of uncontrollable curiosity. With his hands shielding his movement from Victoria, who was now texting furiously, he picked up the small note. He unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, precise. It wasn't a phone number. It wasn't a desperate plea. It was just 12 simple words. A quote followed by a question. "The cosmos is within us. We are made of star stuff. Is this who you wanted to be?" The air left his lungs. The buzzing of the restaurant faded into a distant roar. It wasn't just any quote. It was Carl Sagan. The words were from Cosmos, a book that had been his Bible in a life he'd long since buried. A life before Blackstone Corp, before the crushing weight of his father's expectations, when he had dreamed of being an astronomer, of studying the silent, beautiful mysteries of the universe. It was a quote he had used in his university application essay, an essay he hadn't thought about in over a decade. How could she possibly know that? He looked up, searching for her, but she was gone, vanished into the clockwork of the restaurant. He was left staring at the words on the paper, a message from a ghost, a question that sliced through years of denial and demanded an answer. Is this who you wanted to be? No. The answer was a silent scream in his mind. No, it wasn't. The note was a tiny, insignificant thing, a scrap of paper destined for the trash. But in Ethan's hand, it felt as heavy as a stone, a weight of forgotten dreams and unlived lives. Victoria was still engrossed in her phone, a world away, curating the public narrative of their perfect romance. She hadn't noticed his sharp intake of breath, the sudden rigidity of his posture, or the way his gaze kept darting around the restaurant, searching for the woman who had just lobbed a grenade into the center of his carefully constructed world. Chloe Russo felt the tremor of her own actions all the way in the chaotic heat of the kitchen. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. She stacked dirty plates with trembling hands, the clang of porcelain unnaturally loud in her ears. What had she done? She was a waitress, a ghost in the machine of the city's nightlife. Her job was to be unobtrusive, to anticipate needs without being noticed, to be forgettable. Handing a note to a patron, especially one as high profile as Ethan Blackstone, was an act of professional suicide. Jean-Pierre would fire her on the spot if he found out. Her manager, a stern woman named Mrs. Gable, would ensure she was blacklisted from every fine dining establishment in Manhattan. But she couldn't stop herself. From the moment he'd walked in, she'd seen it. She was a keen observer of people, a skill honed by years of watching them from the periphery. She saw the mask he wore, the impassive, powerful facade of a corporate king. But underneath, she saw the flicker of something else. In the brief moments when he thought no one was watching, when his fiancée was looking away, his mask would slip. A profound weariness would settle into his features, a deep, resonant sadness in his eyes. It was a look she knew well. It was the look of a prisoner. She hadn't planned it. The quote had just come to her. A few years ago, in a different life, she had been an art history major at NYU, spending her nights in the library, devouring books not just on art, but on philosophy, science, and history. She'd stumbled upon an old magazine profile of Ethan Blackstone from before he'd taken over the family company. It was a short piece focusing on the heir apparent, but it mentioned his surprising passion for astrophysics in college, and it quoted a line from his university application essay. "The cosmos is within us. We are made of star stuff." The line had stuck with her, so full of wonder and so at odds with the ruthless corporate raider he had become. Serving him tonight, seeing the hollowness in his eyes, the quote had surfaced in her memory. The question that followed it felt like it had been pulled from her own soul. Is this who you wanted to be? It was a question she asked herself every morning when she looked in the mirror, before she put on her uniform to go serve people who lived in a different universe. Acting on the impulse was reckless, a wild, foolish gamble. But the look in his eyes had compelled her. It was a silent plea she felt compelled to answer. Back at the table, Ethan carefully folded the note and slipped it into his pocket. He placed his credit card in the folder and caught the eye of Jean-Pierre, who hurried over to process the payment. "Everything was to your satisfaction, Mr. Blackstone?" Jean-Pierre asked, his tone obsequious. "Perfect," Ethan said, his voice a low growl. Victoria finally looked up from her phone. "Ready, darling?" she asked, oblivious. "In a moment." When Jean-Pierre returned, Ethan signed the slip. On the tip line, where he would normally leave a generous but standard 25%, he paused. He thought of the risk Chloe had taken. He thought of the question that was now burning a hole in his conscience. He wrote down a number that made his hand shake slightly. $10,000. It was a silent, desperate message. "I heard you." It was also a form of penance, a down payment on a debt he was only just beginning to understand he owed to himself. He stood up, his chair scraping softly against the polished floor. He placed a cool, formal hand on Victoria's back. "Let's go." As they walked out, passing the maitre d's station, Ethan scanned the restaurant one last time. He saw Chloe emerging from the kitchen, her face pale. Their eyes met across the cavernous room. He gave her the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. A current of silent communication passed between them, of acknowledgement, of gratitude, of shared conspiracy. Chloe's expression didn't change, but he saw the flicker of understanding in her eyes before she turned away, her professional mask sliding back into place. A few minutes later, Chloe was clearing his table. She picked up the bill folder to take to accounting, her heart sinking as she braced for the inevitable discovery of her transgression. She opened it to retrieve the signed credit card slip. Her eyes fell on the total, and then on the tip. $10,000, Billionaire. She stared at the number, her mind refusing to process it. It had to be a mistake, a misplaced decimal point, a joke. But the handwriting was clear, The signature definitive. $10,000. It was more money than she made in 3 months of grueling double shifts. It was enough to cover 2 months of rent and the copay for her son Leo's next round of treatments. A wave of dizziness washed over her. It wasn't just the money, it was what the money signified. It wasn't a tip, it was a response. He had not only read the note, he had understood it on a level that defied logic. The sheer size of the amount was a shout in a room where they had only been able to exchange whispers. She clutched the slip to her chest, a mix of terror and a strange, burgeoning hope flooding her veins. She had thrown a pebble into a vast, dark ocean, and somehow it had just caused a tidal wave. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same. The elevator ride to Ethan's penthouse was a silent, vertical ascent into a rarefied atmosphere of wealth and discontent. The apartment, a sprawling duplex overlooking Central Park, was a masterpiece of minimalist design, all glass, chrome, and cold white marble. It was less a home than a gallery, curated to project an image of untouchable success. Tonight, it felt like a mausoleum. Victoria swept into the living room, shedding her coat onto a sterile white sofa. "I'll call Mother," she announced, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "She'll want to hear every detail about the wine pairing. She's convinced the sommelier at the Gilded Cage is a fraud." Ethan barely heard her. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, the glittering expanse of Manhattan spread out before him like a carpet of scattered diamonds. The city lights had once energized him, a testament to ambition and power. Now they felt like a million distant, dying stars. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the note. His fingers traced the neat feminine script. "The cosmos is within us. We are made of star stuff. Is this who you wanted to be?" The words were a key, unlocking a room in his mind he had sealed shut long ago. He was suddenly 20 years old again, lying on a blanket in a field upstate, shivering against the autumn chill. He wasn't the heir to Blackstone Corp then. He was just a student, a young man intoxicated with the vastness of the universe. He remembered the thrill of identifying a nebula through the lens of his first real telescope, the feeling of profound connection to something ancient and immense. He remembered the passion in his voice as he explained the life cycle of a star to a girl whose name he no longer remembered, how he'd quoted Sagan with the unironic fervor of youth. That boy had believed in wonder. He had believed in a destiny written in the stars, not in stock tickers and quarterly reports. Where had that boy gone? He'd been buried layer by layer under the sediment of his father's expectations. William Blackstone was a man who measured the world in profit and loss. He saw his son's interest in astronomy as a frivolous, embarrassing distraction. "Stars don't sign checks, Ethan," he'd once bellowed. "Blackstone Corp is your constellation. It's the only one that matters." Ethan had eventually acquiesced, trading his telescope for a Bloomberg terminal, his star charts for market charts. He had become the son his father wanted, the CEO the company needed, and he had lost himself in the process. "Ethan, are you even listening to me?" Victoria's sharp voice cut through his reverie. She was standing by the bar, a phone pressed to her ear, her other hand on her hip. Her face was a mask of irritation. "Mother wants to know if we finalized the guest list for the rehearsal dinner." "I don't care about the guest list, Victoria," he said, his voice quiet but heavy. She ended the call abruptly. "What is wrong with you tonight? You've been a million miles away since we sat down. Was the deal with the Japanese consortium not to your liking? Did father say something?" Her mind immediately went to business, the only language she truly spoke. "It has nothing to do with business." He turned from the window to face her. "It has to do with us." Victoria scoffed, a brittle, ugly sound. "Us? We're perfect. The press adores us. Our families are thrilled. Our engagement has already boosted both company stock prices by 4%. What more could you possibly want?" "I want something real," he said, the words feeling alien on his tongue. The statement hung in the air between them, incomprehensible to her. "Real," she repeated, her voice dripping with scorn. "We have a $5 million wedding planned at the plaza. We have a prenuptial agreement that is a work of art. This is as real as it gets in our world, Ethan. Or have you forgotten?" The argument escalated quickly, the carefully constructed facade of their relationship crumbling to reveal the cold, transactional framework beneath. Her words weren't about love or betrayal. They were about assets, appearances, and the catastrophic inconvenience his mood was causing to her meticulously planned ascent into the Blackstone dynasty. "Don't you dare do this, Ethan," she warned, her voice low and dangerous. "Don't you dare get sentimental a week before our wedding. My mother has flown in from Paris. The invitations have been engraved. You will not embarrass me." He didn't reply. He walked past her, down a long, white corridor to a part of the penthouse that was never used. He opened a door to a large storage closet, the air inside stale and forgotten. Pushed to the back under a dust cover was a large brass and mahogany object, his old telescope, an Orion SkyQuest, a relic from his university days that had somehow survived a dozen moves, a silent witness to the man he used to be. He dragged it out, the heavy apparatus a strange and beautiful intrusion into the apartment's sterile modernity. He wheeled it to the large terrace adjoining the living room. The city's light pollution was terrible, washing out all but the brightest stars, but he didn't care. He angled the lens upward towards the faint pinprick of light that was Jupiter. Victoria watched him, her expression a mixture of confusion and fury. "What are you doing? Have you lost your mind?" He ignored her, peering into the eyepiece. The image was blurry at first, but then he adjusted the focus, and the planet swam into view, a pale striped orb with its tiny Galilean moons. A wave of something powerful and painful washed over him, a nostalgia so sharp it felt like grief. Grief for the boy who had dreamed of the stars, now trapped on the ground. Chloe's question echoed in the silent space between the city and the sky. "Is this who you wanted to be?" He straightened up, his decision hardening into something solid and real inside him. He looked at Victoria, at the cold anger in her eyes, and he knew it was over. He looked at the endless, glittering city, a kingdom he was supposed to rule, and felt nothing. Then he looked back up at the sky, at the single point of light in his telescope, and he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. He pulled out his phone. Victoria watched, a smug look returning to her face, assuming he was calling his father to be talked back to his senses. But he didn't call William Blackstone. He scrolled through his contacts to a name he hadn't used in over a year. He pressed the call button. It rang twice. "Sterling," a gravelly voice answered. "Michael," Ethan said, his voice steady and clear. "I have a job for you. I need you to find someone. A waitress. Her name is Chloe." Michael Sterling was a ghost. In a city of 8 million people, his gift was to move unseen, to listen unheard, and to find the threads of a life that people thought were carefully hidden. He was a private investigator, but that title was a pale description of his capabilities. He was a purveyor of secrets, a quiet librarian of the city's hidden truths. When Ethan Blackstone called, it was always for a matter of the utmost sensitivity. Finding Chloe Russo was, for a man of Michael's skills, child's play. A waitress at the Gilded Cage who worked the Tuesday night shift? He had her full name, address, and social security number before the sun rose over the East River. But Ethan hadn't just asked him to find her, he'd asked him to understand her. "I want to know everything," Ethan had said. "But be discreet, Michael. Utterly discreet. This isn't about leverage. It's about context." Michael Sterling didn't deal in context. He dealt in facts. But he did as his client asked. He began to build a portrait of Chloe Russo, and the picture that emerged was one of quiet struggle and fierce resilience. Chloe lived in a small third-floor walk-up in Astoria, Queens, a world away from Ethan's Park Avenue penthouse. She worked 2 jobs, her primary position at the Gilded Cage, a grueling 5 nights a week, and a weekend brunch shift at a small cafe called The Daily Grind in her neighborhood. She was 32 years old, unmarried, and she was a single mother. Her son, Leo, was 7 years old. Michael's digging revealed the heart of Chloe's struggle. Leo had been diagnosed 2 years ago with a rare autoimmune disorder. The condition was manageable with consistent, specialized treatment at Mount Sinai. But the treatments were astronomically expensive. Her insurance, a flimsy plan from the restaurant group, covered only a fraction of the cost. The rest she paid out of pocket, a crushing, relentless debt that kept her perpetually on the edge of financial ruin. Michael watched her one morning from his car parked across the street. He saw her walk Leo to school, her hand holding his tightly. He saw the easy affection between them, the way she knelt to fix his backpack, her face softening with a love so potent it was almost visible. She wasn't just a struggling waitress. She was a warrior, fighting a silent daily battle for her son. He also learned that she was a former student at NYU, an art history major with a near-perfect GPA who had been forced to drop out in her final year when Leo first got sick. Her life was a collection of deferred dreams, all sacrificed at the altar of her son's well-being. The information was compelling, a classic tale of hardship that would stir sympathy in even the coldest of hearts. But Michael Sterling had a sixth sense for connections, for the invisible lines that tethered people together across the city. He kept digging, going further back into Chloe's family history. Her mother had died when she was a teenager. Her father, Robert Russo, had passed away 5 years ago from a sudden heart attack. He had been an artist, a painter. He had never been successful in the traditional sense, his work deemed too abstract, too melancholy for the commercial galleries of the time. He had died with a studio full of unsold canvases and a mountain of debt. It was a dead end, another sad story. But Michael was meticulous. He ran a deep financial background check on Robert Russo, and that's when he found it. A single anomalous data point from 15 years prior, a grant. It was for a modest amount, $25,000. But for a struggling artist like Robert, it would have been a lifeline. The grant was awarded by a small private arts foundation, one so obscure it barely had a digital footprint. The Eleanor Foundation. The name struck a chord. Michael cross-referenced it. The Eleanor Foundation had been founded in 1995 by Eleanor Blackstone, Ethan's late mother. Eleanor had been the opposite of her husband, William. Where he was cold, pragmatic, and obsessed with commerce, she had been a passionate and intensely private patron of the arts. She had used a portion of her personal inheritance to set up the foundation, secretly funding dozens of struggling artists, writers, and musicians whose work she admired. She had passed away when Ethan was in college, and while Ethan was technically on the foundation's board, he had paid it little attention, leaving its management to his mother's old financial advisor. He had all but forgotten it existed. This was the connection. This was the context Ethan had asked for. An invisible thread stretching back 15 years, from Ethan's mother to Chloe's father. A quiet act of patronage from one world that had briefly touched another. An act of kindness neither Chloe nor Ethan even knew had connected their families long before they ever met. Meanwhile, in the Davenport townhouse on the Upper East Side, a different kind of investigation was underway. Victoria and her mother, the formidable Anastasia Davenport, were in a state of controlled panic. Ethan had become distant, evasive. He had postponed a meeting with the wedding planners and had been seen leaving his office early 2 days in a row. "He's getting cold feet," Anastasia said, her voice sharp as splintered ice. She was a woman who saw life as a series of strategic campaigns, and her daughter's wedding was her Normandy. "This is unacceptable. We have invested too much time, too much social capital to let this fall apart." "He's babbling about wanting something real," Victoria said with a sneer. "He bought a telescope, for God's sake. He put it on his terrace like some suburban hobbyist." "Sentimentality is a disease of the middle class," Anastasia declared. "You need to tighten your grip, Victoria. Remind him of his obligations. The merger between our companies hinges on this union. William Blackstone will not allow him to jeopardize it. Force the issue, accelerate the plans. A man with a wandering mind needs a shorter leash." Victoria nodded, her sapphire eyes hardening. Her mother was right. This was not a time for seduction. It was a time for enforcement. She would not lose. The Blackstone name, the power, the prestige, it was all within her grasp. She would not let some foolish, last-minute existential crisis or a ridiculous telescope stand in her way. She would find out what was distracting him, and she would eliminate it. Late that night, Ethan sat in his silent penthouse, the city lights below. His phone buzzed. It was a single encrypted email from Michael Sterling. He opened it and began to read. He read about Chloe's walk-up in Astoria, about her 2 jobs, about her abandoned art history degree. He read about her son, Leo, and the crippling medical bills, a knot of something unfamiliar, a mixture of anger at the world's unfairness and a deep, aching empathy tightened in his chest. Then he got to the last part of the report. He read about Robert Russo, the struggling painter, and he read the name of the foundation that had given him a grant 15 years ago, the Eleanor Foundation. His mother's name seemed to lift off the screen. He felt a chill crawl up his spine. His mother, who had died before he became this cold, calculating man. His mother, who had believed in the power of art and beauty, who had tried to teach him that a life's value wasn't measured on a balance sheet. It felt like a sign, a message sent from across the veil of time. The waitress Chloe wasn't just a random stranger. She was the daughter of a man his mother had believed in. Her note wasn't just a fluke. It was an echo of a kindness paid forward years ago, a cosmic ripple reaching him now, at the precise moment he was drowning. The universe wasn't just chaotic and random. Sometimes it whispered. And for the first time in a very long time, Ethan Blackstone was listening. The information from Michael Sterling's report settled into Ethan's soul like a seismic charge, destabilizing the entire bedrock of his existence. He read it 3 times, the sterile facts painting a vibrant, heartbreaking picture of Chloe's life. He saw her waking before dawn, the quiet heroism of her daily routine, the constant, gnawing anxiety of her son's health. He contrasted this image with his own life, with Victoria's casual complaints about the thread count of their Egyptian cotton sheets, with the millions spent on a wedding that felt more like a coronation. The comparison filled him with a profound sense of shame. His world had become a sterile echo chamber of wealth and power. Chloe's life, for all its hardship, was rooted in something undeniable, a fierce, protective love for her child. It was real. The word he had thrown at Victoria now came back to him with the force of a revelation. He craved that reality, that substance, more than he craved his next billion-dollar acquisition. He knew he couldn't just write her a check. That would be an insult. A rich man's clumsy attempt to solve a problem with money, turning her into a project, a charity case. He wanted to meet her, to talk to her, not as a billionaire and a waitress, but as 2 people. Michael's report had noted that Chloe spent her weekend mornings at the Daily Grind, the cafe where she worked the brunch shift. But on her rare weekdays off, she would often take a book and sit there for an hour after dropping Leo at school, savoring a coffee she didn't have to serve. It was her one small weekly indulgence. On Thursday morning, Ethan put on a simple pair of jeans and a gray cashmere sweater, clothes he hadn't worn in years. He left his driver behind and took a cab to Astoria. The neighborhood was a vibrant tapestry of cultures and languages, a world away from the monolithic towers of Midtown. He felt like a tourist in his own city. He found the Daily Grind on a bustling street corner. It was a small, cozy place with mismatched chairs and the rich smell of coffee and baked bread. And there she was. She was sitting at a small table by the window, a paperback book open in front of her, a half-empty mug in her hand. She was wearing a simple knitted sweater. Her hair was down, falling softly around her shoulders. She looked younger, softer than she had in her severe work uniform. His heart pounded. This was insane. What was he going to say? He took a deep breath and walked in. He ordered a black coffee, his voice sounding unnaturally loud to his own ears. Then, feigning a search for a place to sit, he walked towards her table. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calmer than he felt. "Is this seat taken?" Chloe looked up, her eyes widening in stunned recognition. For a moment, she was speechless. It was him, the man from the gilded cage, the man who had left her a tip that had changed her life. "No," she finally managed, gesturing to the empty chair. "It's free." He sat down, the small table feeling impossibly intimate. The silence was thick with unspoken questions. "You're Mr. Blackstone," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Ethan," he corrected her gently. "Please. And you're Chloe." She nodded, her guard slowly rising. What did he want? Was he here because of the note? Was he angry? Was he going to ask for his money back? He didn't mention the note or the tip. Instead, he nodded towards her book. "What are you reading?" She looked down, relieved by the simple, normal question. "It's a collection of essays on the Dutch masters, for an old class I took." Vermeer, Ethan said, a genuine smile touching his lips for the first time. My mother loved Vermeer, the way he painted light. And just like that, the tension eased. They began to talk, not about money or restaurants, but about art, about the quiet beauty of a Vermeer painting, about the way light could tell a story. He talked about his long dormant passion for the stars, and she talked about her abandoned dream of being a museum curator. For an hour, they weren't a billionaire and a waitress. They were just two people discovering a surprising and effortless connection, a shared language of forgotten passions. Chloe found herself relaxing, intrigued by this man who was nothing like the cold, imposing figure she had served. He was thoughtful, a little sad, and possessed a surprising depth she hadn't expected. What neither of them knew was that they were being watched. Victoria, fueled by Anastasia's warnings, had not been idle. She had hired her own investigator, a sleazy ex-cop with none of Michael Sterling's finesse. He had tracked Ethan's cab to Queens and was now sitting across the street, snapping photos with a long-lens camera. That evening, the storm broke. Ethan returned to the penthouse to find Victoria waiting for him, her face pale with rage. On the glass coffee table were a series of grainy photographs, Ethan and Chloe smiling at each other over a coffee cup. Queens, Ethan? Victoria's voice was a venomous hiss. You cancel our meeting with the caterer to go have a secret coffee date in Queens with a waitress? It wasn't a date, Victoria. We were just talking. Talking? She shrieked, her carefully maintained composure shattering completely. Don't insult my intelligence. Is this who you're jeopardizing our future for? A common servant? What could she possibly offer you that I can't? The contempt in her voice, the ugly sneer as she said the word servant, solidified everything for Ethan. He looked at her, at this beautiful, furious woman in her designer dress, and he felt nothing but a profound, hollow emptiness. She offers nothing, Ethan said, his voice dangerously quiet. And that's the point. It isn't about what she can offer me. It's about who I am when I'm not with you. When I was talking to her, I felt like myself. A version of myself I thought was dead. Yourself? Victoria laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You are Ethan Blackstone, the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. You are my fiancé. That is who you are. This pathetic, sentimental fool is an aberration. She paced the room like a caged panther, her fury escalating. This wasn't the heartbreak of a jilted lover. It was the incandescent rage of a CEO whose merger was failing. I will not be humiliated, she spat, her finger jabbing the air. You will call this waitress, and you will end whatever this pathetic flirtation is. You will come to the benefit with me tomorrow night. You will smile for the cameras, and we will be married in 6 days. This is not a negotiation. Ethan stood very still, watching her. The last vestiges of obligation, of duty to his father, of playing the game, finally fell away. He saw with perfect, painful clarity that his entire life had been a negotiation, and he had always been on the losing side. No, he said, the single word cutting through her tirade. She stopped, stunned. What did you say? I said no, he repeated, his voice gaining strength. There will be no benefit tomorrow night. There will be no wedding. It's over, Victoria. For a moment, she just stared at him, her mind refusing to compute the words. Then her face contorted into a mask of pure fury. Over? You think you can just call it off? Just like that? After everything we've planned? My family, your father, they will destroy you. I will destroy you. I will tell every reporter in this city that you left me for a penniless waitress. You will be a laughingstock, a pathetic cliché. Your company's stock will plummet. I will drag your name and the Blackstone legacy through the mud until there is nothing left. Her threats, which a week ago would have terrified him, now seemed hollow and desperate. She wasn't fighting for him. She was fighting for the empire she had been promised. He looked at her, at the stranger she had become, or perhaps the stranger she had always been, and he felt a strange, liberating pity. Do what you have to do, he said calmly. He turned and walked towards his study, the sound of her screaming his name echoing behind him. He closed the door, shutting out the noise, and for the first time in a decade, he felt the profound, terrifying, and exhilarating sensation of being free. The decision was an earthquake. The aftershocks began immediately. Within an hour of Ethan closing his study door on a still-raging Victoria, his phone began to vibrate with an apocalyptic fury. The first call was from his head of PR, a perpetually stressed man named Gerald, who sounded like he was having a heart attack. "Ethan, what in God's name is going on? Anastasia Davenport just called the head of the New York Times Society page personally. The word is out. Is it true? Have you called off the wedding?" "It's true, Gerald," Ethan said, his voice calm amidst the rising storm. "Draft a statement. Keep it simple. No blame, no accusations. Due to irreconcilable personal differences, the marriage of Ethan Blackstone and Victoria Davenport will not be taking place. We ask for privacy at this time." That's it. Nothing more. "But Ethan, they're not going to play by those rules. The Davenports are going to paint you as a villain. They'll leak the story about the waitress. We need to get ahead of this." "No," Ethan said firmly. "We will not engage. We will take the high road, even if we're the only ones on it. Release the statement." He hung up before Gerald could protest further. The next call, the one he had been dreading, came from a number that needed no caller ID. William Blackstone. "What have you done?" His father's voice boomed through the phone, a sound that had been capable of making Ethan shrink since he was a boy. There was no greeting, no preamble, just pure, undiluted rage. "I've called off the wedding, Father," Ethan said, standing straighter, forcing his own voice to remain level. "You've what? Are you insane? This isn't some college romance. This is a strategic alliance. The Davenport merger is the culmination of 5 years of work. You've just detonated a $100 billion deal because you had a moment of, what, indigestion? It was a mistake. I couldn't go through with it." "A mistake?" William roared. "The mistake is thinking you're entitled to an opinion on the matter. Your job was to marry that girl and secure the future of this company, the company your grandfather built and I handed to you." The conversation devolved from there, a brutal verbal assault that stripped bare the rot at the heart of their relationship. To William, Ethan was not a son. He was an asset, his most valuable one, and he had just malfunctioned spectacularly. By the end of the call, the final frayed threads of their bond had been severed. "You are no longer my son," William said, his voice suddenly cold and deadly. "You are a liability. Fix this, or you will find yourself with nothing." He hung up. Ethan stood in the silence of his study, the threats echoing in the vast empty room. He should have been terrified. He should have been devastated. Instead, a strange, profound peace settled over him. He had faced the two things he feared most: public humiliation and his father's wrath, and he had survived. The gilded cage had been blown open, and even if the world outside was full of wreckage, it was also full of air he could finally breathe. He had torched his old life. Now he had to make sure the flames didn't scorch the innocent woman he had dragged into this inferno. He thought of Chloe. The media, fueled by leaks from the Davenports, would find her. They would descend on her life like vultures, picking apart her finances, her past, her single motherhood. They would paint her as a gold digger, a homewrecker. He had to protect her, but he couldn't do it by simply showing up at her door. That would only confirm the narrative. He had to use his power in a way he never had before, silently and without taking credit. He made another call, this one to the elderly, discreet financial advisor who still managed his mother's old charity, the Eleanor Foundation. "Mr. Albright," Ethan said, "I need your help with a confidential matter. It's regarding a grant, an anonymous one." He explained the situation, not the personal details, but the practical ones. He instructed Mr. Albright to contact Mount Sinai's billing department through the foundation. He was to set up an endowment, a fund substantial enough to cover all of Leo Russo's past, present, and future medical expenses related to his condition. The donation was to be listed simply as coming from a friend, with all legal paperwork ensuring the benefactor's identity remained permanently sealed. 2 days later, the media firestorm was at its peak. Tabloids screamed with headlines like, "Billionaire breaks betrothal for Waitress." Photographers were camped outside Ethan's apartment building and, as he'd feared, outside Chloe's small walk-up in Astoria. Chloe was a prisoner in her own home. She had been forced to call in sick to both jobs, her manager at the Gilded Cage firing her over the phone with undisguised venom. Her picture was everywhere. Reporters shouted questions at her through her closed door. She was terrified, confused, and utterly overwhelmed. She hadn't seen or spoken to Ethan since their coffee. She had no idea what was happening, only that her foolish, impulsive note had somehow led to this nightmare. Then she got a call. It was from the patient advocacy office at Mount Sinai Hospital. "Ms. Russo," a kind voice said, "we're calling with some rather unusual but wonderful news regarding your son, Leo's account." Chloe's heart sank. She assumed they were calling to demand payment on her overdue bills. "I'm sorry, I can pay a little next week." "No, Ms. Russo, you don't understand," the woman interrupted gently. "Your account balance has been cleared. It's zero. Furthermore, a benefactor who wishes to remain entirely anonymous has established a trust fund through the hospital. It will cover every single one of Leo's medical needs, from medication to specialist visits to any future procedures, until he is 21 years old. Everything is taken care of." Chloe sank onto her small sofa, the phone slipping from her grasp. She couldn't process the words. It was impossible. A miracle. Tears streamed down her face. Tears of shock, of disbelief, and then of overwhelming, soul-shaking relief. The mountain of debt, the constant, crushing weight of fear that had been her companion for years had vanished. She had no idea who was behind it. Her first thought was of Ethan, but it seemed too much, too fantastical. Why would he do that? Amidst the chaos of his own life imploding, why would he think of her and her son? She sat there for a long time, the shouts of the reporters outside fading into a distant, meaningless noise. Someone, a complete stranger, had given her and her son the gift of a future. The storm was still raging outside her window, but for the first time in a very long time, inside Chloe's heart, there was peace. Weeks later, the media storm had passed. Ethan, having stepped down as CEO of Blackstone Corp., found a quiet purpose in revitalizing his late mother's foundation and rediscovering his passion for astronomy. The chaos he'd unleashed had settled, and he had finally found peace. Chloe, too, had found a new beginning. Free from the crushing weight of medical debt thanks to the anonymous donation, she had re-enrolled at NYU to finish her degree, her son Leo thriving beside her. Ethan finally sought her out at a small park in Queens. As they watched Leo play, Chloe's question was soft but direct. "It was you, wasn't it? The hospital?" He nodded. "Yes." But he explained it wasn't just a whim. He told her about the connection he'd discovered, how his mother's foundation had awarded a small, life-changing grant to her artist father 15 years earlier. Their lives weren't just randomly colliding. They were echoes of a shared, hidden history. The revelation transformed the dynamic from one of charity to one of destiny. Understanding she needed a partner, not a savior, Ethan didn't offer riches. He offered a shared experience. "I have this telescope," he said gently. "I was thinking of a trip to the Griffith Observatory. I'd like to show Leo the rings of Saturn." Chloe looked at her happy, healthy son, then back at the man who had changed everything. She gave him a genuine, brilliant smile. "I think Leo would like that very much." It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but a real, hopeful beginning, the formation of a new constellation. That single handwritten note didn't just stop a wedding, it rewrote two destinies. It proves that the quietest voice can create the loudest explosion, and that true wealth isn't measured by your bank account, but by the courage to ask if the life you're living is truly your own. Ethan and Chloe's story reminds us that it's never too late to look up at the stars and choose a different path, to find an authentic connection in the most unexpected of places. If their journey from a gilded cage to a new constellation moved you, please take a moment to hit that like button and share this story with someone who might need a reminder that real change often starts with a single, brave question. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story about the hidden moments that change lives forever. Thank you for listening.